The grand ballroom of the Intercontinental was a galaxy of shimmering gowns and tailored tuxedos, a universe Zola Adebayo felt she had no right to inhabit. She clutched the stem of her champagne flute, the cool glass a stark contrast to the nervous heat flushing her skin. Across the room, bathed in the soft glow of a crystal chandelier, he stood there. Marcus. Her ex. The architect of her most recent heartbreak, a man who had chiseled away at her confidence until she felt like a ruin. He was laughing, that easy, charming laugh that had once captivated her and now only served as a bitter reminder of her own naivety. He was with a new woman, a statuesque blonde draped in crimson, but his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, kept finding hers. He was enjoying this, she knew. Enjoying her discomfort. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of her composure. She had to get out of his line of sight. She had to breathe. Turning abruptly, she scanned the periphery of the crowd, her gaze landing on a man standing alone near the velvet drapes of a floor-to-ceiling window. He was a portrait of quiet intensity, his presence a stark anchor in the swirling sea of socialites. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark, custom-fit suit that spoke of understated power, and his features were strikingly handsome. Korean, she guessed, with sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb everything around him without effort. He held a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light, and he seemed utterly unconcerned with the networking and preening that defined the evening. He was simply watching. An idea, born of pure desperation, bloomed in Zola's mind. It was insane. It was forward. But it was better than suffocating under Marcus's triumphant gaze. Taking a steadying breath, she smoothed down the emerald silk of her dress and began to walk, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. He saw her coming, his gaze shifting from the crowd to her, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. As she stopped before him, she felt impossibly small, all her practiced corporate confidence deserting her. Her voice, when it came, was a breathy whisper she barely recognized as her own. "I have a strange request," she began, her eyes pleading with him to understand. "Could you dance with me? My ex is watching." She risked a glance over her shoulder, and the man's eyes followed hers, resting on Marcus for a beat before returning to her face. A long moment passed. She expected a polite refusal, a condescending smile. Instead, a slow, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of his lips. He set his whiskey glass down on a nearby table with a deliberate, unhurried motion. Then he extended his hand. "He has poor taste," was all he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "It would be my pleasure." As his hand enveloped hers, a current of warmth shot up Zola's arm, a startling jolt of electricity that silenced the frantic noise in her head. He led her to the dance floor, his movements fluid and assured, parting the sea of bodies with an effortless grace. He didn't pull her close immediately, instead holding her at a respectful distance as the orchestra swelled into a slow, romantic melody. One hand rested firmly on the small of her back, the other held her hand as if it were a delicate treasure. It was a classic, formal hold, yet it felt more intimate than any touch Marcus had ever given her. The man, whose name she still didn't know, was a phenomenal dancer. He guided her with subtle pressure, a slight turn of his wrist, a gentle squeeze of his hand, anticipating her every move until it felt less like dancing and more like floating. Zola, who had always felt a little clumsy, found herself moving with a grace she didn't know she possessed. She looked up at him, truly looked at him for the first time, and was struck by the intensity of his gaze. He wasn't just going through the motions, he was watching her, his dark eyes searching hers as if trying to read the story written there. "Zola," she said, her voice a little stronger now, buoyed by his steady presence. "My name is Zola." A genuine smile finally broke through his stoic facade, transforming his handsome features into something breathtaking. "Jean Wu," he replied. "And Zola, you can relax. You're safe with me." The words were simple, yet they landed with profound weight. Safe. When was the last time she had felt that? She allowed herself to melt just a little, the rigid tension in her shoulders easing. From the corner of her eye, she saw Isabella, her direct superior and a woman who thrived on office gossip, watching them with a predatory gleam in her eyes. Zola's stomach tightened, but then Jinwoo dipped her unexpectedly, a playful, elegant movement that made her gasp and then laugh, a real, unforced laugh. When he brought her back up, their faces were closer, and she could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, a subtle mix of sandalwood and something distinctly masculine. The song was ending, and a part of her mourned it. Just as the final note faded, a sneering voice cut through their bubble. Well, look who cleaned up. It was Marcus, his arm possessively around the blonde, his smile a cruel slash across his face. Finding new toys already, Zola? Before Zola could even form a response, Jinwoo stepped slightly in front of her, a subtle but definitive shielding gesture. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't posture, but the sheer force of his quiet confidence seemed to suck the air out of the space around them. I believe, Jinwoo said, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm level. The lady and I were having a private moment. He held Marcus's gaze, and Zola saw a flicker of genuine fear in her ex's eyes before he scoffed, grabbing his date's arm and stalking away. Jinwoo turned back to Zola, his expression softening. Are you all right? She could only nod, her throat tight with a mixture of shock and a bewildering sense of gratitude. Who was this man? The following Monday morning, the sterile, air-conditioned chill of the boardroom was a world away from the warmth of the ballroom. Zola sat at the long, polished mahogany table, her portfolio open, her heart hammering against her ribs with a familiar pre-presentation anxiety. Today was the day. The official introductory meeting with executive team from Daehyun Group, the Seoul-based conglomerate considering a multi-billion-dollar merger with their firm. This deal was her baby. She had spent the last 6 months leading the research and proposal team, and a successful presentation today would all but guarantee her the senior project director promotion she so desperately coveted. Isabella sat opposite her, a picture of smug composure, already currying favor with the existing board members. Zola's friend, Chloe, shot her an encouraging thumbs up from further down the table. The boardroom doors swung open, and Mr. Henderson, their current CEO, walked in, beaming. Good morning, everyone. It is my distinct honor to introduce you all to the new Chief Executive Officer of the Daehyun Group, the man who will be making the final decision on this merger. Zola looked up, a polite, professional smile plastered on her face, ready to impress. The man who walked in behind Mr. Henderson was not some stern, older executive. It was him. It was Jinwoo. He was dressed in a sharp, navy blue suit, his hair impeccably styled, but his eyes were the same, intense, perceptive, and now, fixed directly on her. A slow-burning fire of pure, unadulterated horror crawled up Zola's neck. The man she had asked to be her fake dance partner, the stranger she had whispered her secrets to in a moment of panic, was the billionaire CEO who held her entire career in his hands. Dramatic irony wasn't a strong enough term for this. This was a cosmic joke of epic proportions. Jinwoo's expression was impassive, betraying nothing, but she saw it. A brief, almost imperceptible flicker of recognition in his eyes as they met hers. He knew. Of course he knew. He took his seat at the head of the table, the seat of ultimate power, and the meeting began. Zola felt like she was in a dream, her own voice sounding distant as she was introduced. When it was her turn to present, she walked to the podium on unsteady legs, her carefully prepared speech feeling like ash in her mouth. She could feel his eyes on her, and she risked a glance. He was leaning back in his chair, observing her with that same quiet intensity from the gala. But this wasn't a dance floor. This was a battlefield. Ms. Adebayo was our lead on this proposal. Isabella's voice dripped with saccharine sweetness as she interjected. She's very passionate. We all had quite the eventful weekend at the Intercontinental Gala, didn't we, Zola? The thinly veiled jab was a declaration of war. Zola's cheeks burned, but She met Isabella's venomous gaze with a steady one of her own before turning her attention back to the man at the head of the table. She had to salvage this. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and began to speak, her voice shaking only for a moment before it found its strength. She would not be defined by a desperate moment in a ballroom. She would be defined by her work. The week that followed was a masterclass in corporate sabotage, orchestrated by a bitterly jealous Isabella. The first blow landed on Wednesday. Zola was hours away from presenting the finalized Q3 financial projections for the merger, projections she had personally triple-checked, when she discovered the master file was corrupted. Not just corrupted, but wiped clean, replaced with a nonsensical string of characters. A cold dread washed over her. This wasn't a server glitch. This was deliberate. She spent the next 36 hours working around the clock with Chloe, painstakingly reconstructing the data from raw source files, fueled by black coffee and a burning sense of injustice. They made the deadline by a razor-thin margin, but Zola was exhausted, the shadows under her eyes telling a story of sleepless nights and mounting stress. Jin-woo had been in the presentation, his face an unreadable mask as she walked the board through the resurrected numbers. He asked sharp, incisive questions, giving no quarter, but his gaze seemed to linger on her, a silent inquiry into the strain she was obviously under. The second blow was more personal and far crueler. On Friday morning, an email announced the hiring of a new short-term consultant for the merger's marketing synergy division. The consultant was Marcus. Zola felt the blood drain from her face as she saw him striding through the office, shaking hands, oozing that familiar, insincere charm. He locked eyes with her across the open-plan workspace and gave her a slow, smug wink. It was Isabella's doing, of course. A strategic move designed to throw Zola completely off her game. Having Marcus here, in her professional sanctuary, was a violation. Every interaction was a minefield, every hallway conversation a potential ambush of passive-aggressive remarks and feigned concern. "You look tired, Z," he'd say, leaning against her desk. "Burning the midnight oil? You always did take things too seriously." He was a constant, unnerving reminder of the gaslighting and emotional manipulation she had fought so hard to escape. Her self-doubt, a beast she thought she had slain, began to stir in its cage. Chloe was her rock, a fierce defender in the face of the onslaught. "She's a snake," Chloe muttered, glaring at Isabella's office. "And he's the venom she's using. Don't let them win, Zola. You are 10 times the professional she is." Zola tried to heed her friend's words, focusing on her work with a ferocious intensity. She meticulously documented everything, saved files in multiple locations, and communicated through emails to create a paper trail. She would not be caught off guard again. Through it all, she was acutely aware of Jin-woo's presence. He was a quiet observer, always seeming to be there when things went wrong, a silent figure in the back of a tense meeting, a brief, shared glance in the elevator. He never intervened directly, yet Zola felt his scrutiny not as a threat, but as a test. It was as if he was watching, waiting to see if she would break. And Zola was determined not to. The breakthrough came late one Thursday night. Zola was alone in the office, long after even the most dedicated workaholics had gone home, sifting through server logs with a gnawing suspicion she couldn't shake. The official IT report had blamed the corrupted file on a transient power surge, a convenient, catch-all explanation that felt too neat. She wasn't a cybersecurity expert, but she was meticulous. She cross-referenced the server access times with the building's security fob records. And there it was. A single login to the finance server at 2:17 a.m. on the night of the corruption. The login credentials belonged to a junior analyst in Isabella's department, a young man who was notoriously terrified of his boss. But the security records showed that the analyst's fob hadn't been used to enter the building after 6 p.m. that day. However, another fob had accessed their floor at 2:12 a.m. and left at 2:20 a.m. Isabella's fob. It wasn't definitive proof. Isabella could argue she was working late and the analyst had left his computer logged in, but it was a thread. A very strong thread. The next morning, The tension between Zola and Isabella was a palpable, living thing in the office. Isabella watched her with narrowed, suspicious eyes, as if she could sense that Zola was onto her. The final piece of the puzzle fell into her lap that afternoon, in the form of an interoffice mail envelope with no return address. Inside was a flash drive. Chloe stood guard as Zola plugged it into her laptop. It contained a single audio file. She clicked play, and the tinny, secretly recorded voice of Isabella filled the silence. "He's just a pawn, Marcus. Do what I tell you. Rattle her cage. Make her look unstable. When I get the promotion after this merger, I'll make sure you're well compensated for your consulting services." The conspiracy was no longer a suspicion. It was a recorded fact. Later that day, Zola received a calendar invitation. Project update. The subject line read. The meeting was with Jin-woo. In his office. Alone. Her heart leaped into her throat. She walked into his penthouse office, a sprawling space with a panoramic view of the city skyline, feeling a mix of dread and a strange, electric anticipation. He was standing by the window, much like he had been at the gala, a lone figure of power against the glittering backdrop. "Ms. Adebayo." "Zola," he said, turning to face her. His formal demeanor was gone, replaced by something more personal, more direct. "Tell me what's really going on." It wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation. A test of her courage. She looked at this powerful, enigmatic man, the man who had held her on the dance floor and now held her future in his hands. She had the flash drive in her purse, a weapon that could either save her career or detonate it completely. She took a breath. "It's complicated," she began, her voice steady. He took a step closer, the space between them shrinking, charged with unspoken history. "I'm not afraid of complicated," Jin-woo said, his voice low and resonant. "I value the truth." "Show me." It was in that moment she knew. He wasn't just another corporate suit. He was an ally. And the game had just changed. With the flash drive in her purse feeling as heavy as a handgun, Zola took a deliberate step into the vast, minimalist office. The city lights glittered below like a fallen constellation, a silent audience to the defining moment of her career. She met Jin-woo's gaze, a dark, steady anchor in the swirling sea of her anxiety. This was a gamble, a leap of faith based on a dance, a handful of shared glances, and a gut feeling that the man before her was different. He valued truth, he had said. She decided to give it to him, raw and unvarnished. She walked to the sleek, glass-topped desk that separated them and placed the small flash drive on its surface. It made a soft, definitive click in the quiet room. "Isabella has been sabotaging me since the merger was announced," Zola stated, her voice clear, devoid of the tremor she had feared. "She sees me as a threat to the promotion she believes is hers by right." She proceeded to lay it all out, a chronological account of the deceit. She explained the corrupted financial projections, the impossibility of a random glitch, and her discovery in the server and security logs, the digital footprints that pointed directly to Isabella's late-night visit. She then told him about Marcus, about his sudden, strategic appearance as a consultant, and the campaign of psychological harassment that followed. Jin-woo listened without interruption, his expression unchanging, but Zola could see a muscle tightening in his jaw. When she was finished, he picked up the flash drive, turning it over in his long, elegant fingers. "And this?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "This," Zola said, her resolve hardening, "is a recording of Isabella telling Marcus to make me look unstable and promising to pay him off once she secures the promotion." Jin-woo stood motionless for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the drive. Then he looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw the ice in his eyes melt away, replaced by a searing heat. It wasn't pity. It was a cold, controlled fury. "In my world, Zola," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "loyalty is everything. Betrayal is dealt with. I knew something was wrong. The sheer number of coincidences and last-minute saves surrounding your work was statistically improbable. I don't believe in luck. I believe in resilience. I was waiting to see how you would handle it." He walked around the desk, closing the distance between them until he was standing just a few feet away. You have not disappointed me. A profound sense of relief washed over Zola, so potent it almost made her knees weak. He believed her. He had seen her struggle, and he had been waiting for her to fight back. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He gave her a sharp, predatory smile that was both terrifying and thrilling. "Now," he said, "we let her build her own gallows. And then we hand her the rope." The plan was simple in its elegance and brutal in its execution. They would proceed as if Zola had never spoken to him, as if she were still struggling, isolated, and on the brink of failure. The final merger approval meeting was scheduled for the following Friday, and Jinwoo decreed that Isabella and Zola would give a joint presentation. "She will be expecting you to fail," Jinwoo explained during one of their clandestine late-night planning sessions in his deserted office. "She will try to seize the moment, to present herself as the hero who saved the deal from your incompetence. We will give her every opportunity to do so." Over the next week, Zola played the part of a woman unraveling. She let Marcus's taunts seem to land, feigning frustration. She appeared flustered in team meetings, allowing Isabella to publicly correct her on minor points, a smug, triumphant look on the older woman's face. It was a difficult, draining performance, but the knowledge that Jinwoo was her silent partner, a powerful, unseen force watching from the wings, gave her a strength she had never known. Their strategy sessions became the anchor of her week. After the office emptied, she would take the private elevator to the penthouse floor. There, surrounded by blueprints and financial models, they would work, the city lights their only witness. The line between professional and personal began to blur in those quiet hours. He would order dinner, and they would eat from takeout containers spread across his billion-dollar desk, the conversation drifting from market projections to their pasts. She learned he had built his empire from the ashes of his family's disgraced company, that his quiet demeanor masked a relentless drive. He, in turn, drew out her story, not just of Marcus, but of her ambitions, her dreams, the things that truly drove her. One night, as she was packing up to leave, her shoulders aching with exhaustion, he stopped her. "You're doing well," he said, his voice softer than she was used to. "This isn't easy. I just want it to be over," she confessed, looking up at him. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. He was standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing away a stray eyelash from her cheek. The touch was featherlight, yet it sent a jolt of lightning through her entire system. His fingers lingered for a moment too long, a silent question passing between them. The air grew thick, charged with an undeniable current. "Soon," he promised, his voice a low murmur that was for her alone. He dropped his hand, and the moment was broken, but the electricity of it remained, humming under her skin all the way home. The trap was set. The players were in position. And for the first time, Zola wasn't afraid. She was ready. The night before the final presentation, the air in the city seemed to crackle with anticipation. Zola had gone over her part of the presentation 100 times, her notes memorized, her counter-arguments prepared. Yet a nervous energy still thrummed beneath her skin. Just as she was about to call it a night, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jinwoo. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" She smiled. "As I'll ever be." A moment later, another text came through.
"I'm downstairs.
"Let me buy you a drink." "You've earned it." Her heart did a frantic little flip. She found him parked in a sleek black car, the kind that purred rather than rumbled. He wasn't in his usual power suit, but a simple black cashmere sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. He took her to a quiet, dimly lit jazz bar, a hidden gem tucked away from the city's frantic pace. The pretense of business was gone, replaced by an easy intimacy that felt both new and strangely familiar. "I have a confession," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The night of the gala. I knew who you were." Zola froze, her glass halfway to her lips. "You did." He nodded, a wry smile playing on his lips. "I make it a point to know everything about the key players in a deal of this magnitude. I had read your file. I knew you were the lead on the proposal. I was intrigued." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "And then this beautiful, incredibly brave woman in a green dress walked up to me and asked me to dance because her ex was watching. How could I possibly say no? Zola felt a blush creep up her neck. All this time, she thought she had been a complete stranger to him, a random face in the crowd. But he had been watching her even then. The knowledge was both terrifying and exhilarating. You were testing me, she realized aloud. From the very beginning, I was, he admitted, his eyes holding hers. I needed to know if the brilliant strategist on paper had the strength to survive in a boardroom full of sharks. You've proven you're not just a survivor, Zola. You're a queen. The word hung in the air between them, shimmering with unspoken meaning. After the bar, he drove her home, the comfortable silence in the car filled with everything that hadn't been said. He walked her to the door of her apartment building, the cool night air wrapping around them. Under the soft glow of the entrance light, he stopped, turning to face her fully. Tomorrow, he said, his voice a low, serious murmur, you will take back your power. You will show them all who you are, and you will do it with grace and with fire. He reached up, cupping her face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. But tonight, just be Zola, and then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of certainty, of pent-up admiration and a deep, simmering passion. It was a kiss that tasted of whiskey and promises, a kiss that silenced all the remaining doubts in her mind and set her soul ablaze. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathless. Get some rest, he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. You have a war to win in the morning. The main boardroom felt like a gladiatorial arena. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the tense air. The entire board was present, along with Mr. Henderson, Marcus, Isabella, and Zola. Jean Wu sat at the head of the long table, a silent, imposing judge presiding over the proceedings. Isabella began the presentation, her voice smooth and confident. She was at the top of her game, weaving a compelling narrative of the merger's potential, seamlessly integrating Zola's research as her own. Zola stood beside her, playing her part, appearing slightly nervous and deferential. She could feel Marcus's smug gaze on her from across the table. The trap was sprung halfway through. While the overall projections are strong, Isabella said, adopting a tone of grave concern, I would be remiss if I did not bring a potential issue of internal instability to the board's attention. She clicked to a new slide, which showed a fabricated email chain. In it, Zola appeared to be communicating with a competitor, sharing sensitive data. I discovered this last night, Isabella said, her voice dripping with false regret. It appears Ms. Adebayo's personal duress, which we have all witnessed, may have led to a catastrophic lapse in judgment. A collective gasp went through the room. Mr. Henderson looked at Zola, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a triumphant smirk on his face. This was it. The moment of her execution. Zola felt a strange calm settle over her. She looked at Jean Wu, who gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. That is a very serious accusation, Isabella, Zola said, her voice ringing with newfound confidence, cutting through the stunned silence. She walked to the podium, taking control of the presentation. And it's a very clumsy fabrication. With a click of her own remote, she brought up her own slide. It showed the email's header information, a string of technical data. As you can see from the IP address and metadata, that email originated not from my computer, but from a terminal in the marketing department, specifically the one assigned to our temporary consultant, Mr. Davis. Marcus's smirk vanished, replaced by a pasty white shock. Zola didn't stop. She methodically, clinically dismantled every lie, presenting her own documented evidence, the server logs, the security fob records, the restored, original financial models that showed Isabella had been subtly altering numbers to overstate her own department's contributions. The boardroom was utterly silent, captivated by the drama. Isabella hasn't just been trying to discredit me, Zola said, her eyes locking on her tormentor. She has been actively sabotaging this merger for her own personal gain. For the final, killing blow, she looked directly at Jean Wu. With your permission, Mr. Kim, I have one final piece of evidence, he nodded again. Zola pressed a button, and the audio file from the flash drive played through the boardroom speakers. Isabella's voice, sharp and venomous, filled the room. He's just a pawn, Marcus. Rattle her cage. Make her look unstable. The sound of Isabella's treachery, raw and undeniable, was her undoing. Her face crumpled, the mask of professional composure shattering into a million pieces. Mr. Henderson shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. Security, he roared. The confrontation was over. The war was won. In the chaotic aftermath, as security escorted a sputtering Isabella and a terrified Marcus from the building, a sense of surreal victory settled over Zola. Chloe rushed to her side, wrapping her in a fierce, triumphant hug. Colleagues who had previously kept their distance now offered words of congratulation and admiration. Even Mr. Henderson approached her, his expression a mixture of shame and respect. Ms. Adebayo.
Zola.
I am profoundly sorry. I misjudged you, and I allowed this to happen under my watch. Zola accepted his apology with a grace that surprised even herself. An hour later, she stood once more in Jinwoo's office. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a quiet, bone-deep satisfaction. He was behind his desk, signing a series of documents with swift, decisive strokes. When he finished, he put the pen down and looked at her, his dark eyes warm with an emotion she was beginning to recognize as pride. The final merger papers, he said simply. It's done. He stood and walked over to her, stopping just before her. I have also just approved a significant promotion. Senior Project Director, heading the entire merger integration team. The position is yours, Zola. You've more than earned it. A tear of pure, unadulterated joy escaped her eye, and she quickly brushed it away. Thank you, Jinwoo, he smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up his entire face. The thanks are all mine. You've saved this deal and exposed a rot within this company. He closed the remaining space between them, his hands finding her waist. The professional business was concluded. This was personal. I told you he had poor taste, he murmured, his voice a low, intimate rumble, echoing his words from the night they met. He saw a beautiful woman. He never saw the diamond. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a soft, tender kiss that spoke of respect, admiration, and a deep, burgeoning love. So, she whispered against his mouth, a playful curiosity in her voice. This whole mysterious, powerful CEO thing. Is that all there is to it? Or should I be worried about hostile takeovers in more than just the business sense? Jinwoo chuckled, a rich, warm sound that vibrated through her. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her in a possessive, protective embrace. Let's just say, he whispered, his eyes dancing with a dangerous, captivating light, that my family has always been very persuasive. And I always get what I want. He kissed her again, deeply and passionately, and as she melted into his embrace, looking out at the endless city lights that stretched before them, Zola knew she had finally found her own empire.